what's the use of two strong legs if you only run away? And what use is the finest voice when you have nothing good to say? What good is strength and muscle if you only push and shove? And what's the use of two good ears when you can't hear those you love? It's not just what you're born with, it's what you choose to bear. And it's not how big your share is, but how much you can share. And it's not the fights you dreamed of, but those you really fought. It's not what you've been given, it's what you do with what you've got. Yeah, it's not just what you're born with, it's what you choose to bear. And it's not how big your share is, but how much you can share. And it's not the fights you dreamed of, but those you really fought. It's not what you've been given, it's what you do with what you've got.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Seeds of Revolution. We have a very special episode for you today. My name is Luke.
And I'm Karina.
Karina is a special return guest.
Sitting on the other side of the table of the microphone this time.
We are here in so-called Vancouver, Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh territory to talk to the Catholic worker and to Sarah and to learn more about the Catholic worker movement and the Samaritan House here. Do you want to introduce yourself?
I'm Sarah Bjorknas. I co-founded the Vancouver Catholic Worker with Victoria Marie in 1998, and I've lived here ever since with many humans and many critters.
So what is the Catholic worker movement?
It's a Christian anarchist movement that was started in New York in the 1930s with Dorothy Day and Peter Morin. Dorothy Day was journalist and writer, seeker, socialist, and she was very interested in what people's struggles were and had a very interesting and full life, encountered Catholicism and recognized in it how the church was more than just worshiping philosophy, but it was a source of community and support for particularly immigrant communities, obviously all settlers, and recognized the work that they did in trying to level the world for those who were not the moneyed class. So she tried to find an intersection between her politics and that worship. I think she was raised Anglican, so there was some connection there. And someone put her in touch with Peter Morin, who was this older fellow, interesting French guy who was all about the philosophy of anarchism and socialism and the connection with the ancient church. And so he took it upon himself to teach her the history and the social justice part of Catholic faith, and came up with this sort of plan for, how people should live. There should be a house of hospitality in every parish. There should be a roundtable discussion for the clarification of thought. And there should be what ended up being called agronomic universities, which was where scholars would work alongside workers to produce food, but there would be learning. So learning and working together on the land. So that was the grand plan. They started with a newspaper called The Catholic Worker, and they wrote about these things. And it was the 30s, and people were hungry and struggling. So folks got together and were feeding people. Dorothy was living with her daughter, with her brother and his family in an apartment, and they started feeding people out of there. And then people started showing up and saying, "Is this the Catholic Worker House of Hospitality that's been written about?" And they're like, "Okay." And that's essentially how it started. And those are the sort of the things. So the newspaper represents the round table idea, but there was also, they would also organize meetings and gatherings, and many communities do that on a regular, semi-regular basis, just gather people to discuss and study and etc. The houses of hospitality, obviously, probably the most visible part of the movement, where people live in community together, sort of pledge voluntary poverty and do various kinds of service, whatever makes sense, whatever's needed, whatever their skills are. And there's a few Catholic worker farms, like over time, there's still some that exist, but has turned out to always been like the harder community to build and maintain. So yeah, that's the essence of the movement, and it's a movement, so it's not a like anyone can say they're a Catholic worker. It's like, oh, I want to gather some people to discuss these ideas. I want to live in community with some people and share what we have and try to serve our neighbors. Nobody will say you can't. And so communities pop up and go away as they have the ability to sustain themselves. So
Do you have to be Catholic to be a Catholic worker?
you do not. I mean, it came out of people that's whose their faith was, and I think a lot of them still are, but not everyone in a community has to be Catholic, and not every community even starts that way. I think I mentioned to you earlier, there's 30 years ago when we were sort of exploring this, there was a community in Seattle, and I think it initially was a Catholic family who started that, but by that point, all of the people who were involved were either Buddhist or non-observant of anything. And there was a community, it's I think no longer, in, I want to say Atlanta, I think. And we jokingly refer to them as the Protestant worker. They were Baptist. But I mean, they essentially were doing all the same thing with the same philosophy. They did prison outreach and abolition work and all that kind of stuff with this, the same approach. And they had a newspaper. And so, yeah, people called them the Protestant worker.
Can you tell me more about the tenets or the principles of the Catholic worker? I'm curious, when you say people don't have to be Catholic to join, what is the binding force behind?
Well, the baseline scriptural is the works of mercy, so the corporal and spiritual works of mercy, which don't ask me to list them out. Okay. I guess I know I have them on our website probably somewhere, but yeah, so there's those basic physical: feed the hungry, clothe the naked, visit the imprisoned.
Okay, I have them here.
Okay.
Corporal works: feed the hungry, give drink to the thirsty, give alms to the poor, shelter the homeless, care for the sick, visit the imprisoned, and bury the dead.
Yeah.
And then the other side is the spiritual works, which involves counsel the doubtful, instruct the ignorant, admonish the sinner, comfort the sorrowful, forgive injuries, bear wrongs patiently, and pray for the living and the dead.
Yeah. So, take them and run with them, basically. That's the core of the people get together and they want to do those things and they figure out how to do them. Yeah.
Where does the name worker come from in Catholic worker? Is that an allusion to the Catholic laborer, or is it more of a proletarian, working class thing, or where does
I think the second, for sure. And there was some, I can't recall now because I haven't really thought about it in a long time, but there was some sort of debate about what to call the paper, and the movement ended up being called that. But I think at one point it was there was an S, like the Catholic workers, and so it was sort of a practical and philosophical. This is the workers are the majority, and these are the people who are all on the same level, but they're getting shit on all the time. And so there's philosophy behind that, but then there's those corporal works of mercy of let's look after each other. Yeah.
How long have you been involved with the Catholic worker movement, and when did you decide to transform your home into a hospitality house?
I learned about Catholic worker from Vicky, probably, sometime in the mid-90s. There was a woman, Lisa Wagner, who used to do a one-woman play about Dorothy Day, and she came to town, and so I didn't know anything about it before that. Vicky knew because she grew up in Brooklyn, and so then I started reading read Dorothy's biography, The Long Loneliness, like read whatever I can get my hands on, which was not a lot. It's really not a concept that's known much out here in the West Coast or in Canada. So it sort of sparked my imagination. Obviously, it was something that interested Vicky because she was part of an organization that sponsored the play, and she had some knowledge. Not really, like she wasn't really aware of it as a kid, of Dorothy. And the thing that did stick out to her is in the 50s in New York. So the original Catholic worker houses were in New York, and they're still there. But in the 50s, it was mandatory for people to do civil defense because they were all worried about nuclear war. And so they would have these like drills where people had to go into like the subways or whatever because, get under the desks or whatever. So Vicky remembers those drills and remembers that the Catholic worker and Dorothy would protest them by going to the park and having a picnic instead of going where they were supposed to go. So that's what she remembered about Catholic worker. So like everything I heard and read sort of sparked more interest and imagination. Vicky and I went to Milwaukee to a conference celebrating the centenary of Dorothy's birth, where scholars and Catholic workers got together and put on workshops and gave presentations. And we have the book now with the essays from it. So then like learned lots from that. And I was reading The Long Loneliness like during that time, and a vivid memory was flying back from there with Vicky, reading the book. I wasn't finished yet, and I looked over at Vicky and I said, "We could do this." Didn't really know what that meant, but it was like we could do something like this. So when we got back, we started organizing, just like calling to people that we knew and said, "Hey, Zane, we want to get together and talk about the idea of a Catholic worker." And so we did that for a while. Vicky was working at one of the local churches at the time, and so had access to the sort of the church communication network, like by fax. That's how old we are.
What year was that?
That would have been the 90s, like probably 97.
Okay.
And so we like did up a one-pager double-sided newsletter and said, hey, we want to do a Catholic worker. Like, does anybody know of a house to rent or rent to own? I didn't even know that concept of rent to own, but Vicky had a real understanding of the precariousness of renting, and then to rent and like invite strangers into your house would be like, you'd be under extra scrutiny. And so you don't want that precarity. So whatever. Anyways, it was sort of like a, hey, who wants to talk about this? Who has some connections? And weirdly, the only person who ever contacted us about that was a Catholic woman who it turned out I knew her daughter from university, like a little bit. She's a real estate agent. And so she phoned Vicky, I guess. And then Vicky told me, and I'm like, why are we talking to I don't understand. Like, I'm going to buy a house. My mom sold real estate at the time, like farms and like not high powered stuff. And she could never explain to me, like, why would you want to buy anything in your 20s? Like, anyways, so we set up this meeting and I was like, why are we talking to a real estate person? Like, I don't get it. Anyway, so she put us in touch with this other Catholic guy who is a mortgage broker. And, because I work in a public library, so I have a public sector halfway decent paying job. Vicky had a halfway decent paying job. We ended up buying a house. Like, that wasn't the plan necessarily, but that's what ended up happening. So that was the only thing that happened out of that sort of original newsletter. And then we met with people and tried to figure out like who would live in the house. Originally, Vicky wasn't going to live here. She felt she was too old, too set in her ways. She didn't want to live with a bunch of people, but she did. So this house was never anything other than a Catholic worker house for the last 28 years.
Can you explain what a hospitality house is for the folks who don't know?
Oh, well, I mean, it's basically just being open to offering shelter to someone in like not in any kind of institutional way, not for any kind of fees. Some people in the movement, refer to having a Christ room, like a way to to offer hospitality if you're maybe not in community, but you have a spare room, is to be like, just be open when you're aware that somebody needs a home. Be willing to like let them live in your home with you. And that's basically what we tried to create, is just a family home where people live. Now, when you invite strangers in and you may or may not know anything about them, like you encounter everything, like all kinds of physical and mental health challenges or like personalities and all that stuff. It happens, but just the openness to be willing and to do it in a non-institutional way is essentially it. And the way I explain it to like people at work who, I'm not going to go into the whole like this is what Catholic worker is. It's like it's just like trying to be family to people who don't have family around or don't have their family anymore, either literally or metaphorically. You know, like when shit goes down, people often turn to or are offered help by various members of their family because that's what you do. But not everybody has that because they're literally across the world or across the country, or like there's a divide and it's not an option, or they're not around anymore. So just like being that landing spot. So that's what it means for us anyways. I mean, there's other communities that are like larger and maybe a little more, not institutional, but a little more maybe regimented and have a little more structure to how they do what they do. But because we were always small, it was always like me and Vicky and maybe one other person who was like intentionally living in community. And then everybody else is like a guest until they stick around long enough and then they're a community member.
Can you tell us more about Vicky?
Yeah, sure. Vicky was born in Brooklyn in 1945. She was African American with a little bit of, she found out later, like a little bit of Cherokee. And her parents weren't married. Her mom's family was Catholic, so she went to Catholic school, but because her parents weren't married and she was Black, it was not the best experience for her, but she went to 12 years of Catholic school.
You said, I remember you saying she was the only Black kid in the Catholic school.
I think, yeah, most of the time she was the only Black kid in school. And she wanted to be a nun, but there was only one order in the U.S. who would accept Black women, but she was illegitimate, so that was out of the. So she used to joke about she did spend some time in what she called the wayward girls' school. So she was not always well behaved. She was never well behaved. Let's just be honest, right? So, and she migrated fairly young up to Canada, to Montreal, and then Ottawa, and then came out to Vancouver in like the 70s. She struggled with alcoholism until she was in her 40s, and then she got sober. She found some cool women in the church here, the Franciscan Sisters of the Atonement, connected with them. So connected back with the church, and then went to university because that's what she always wanted to do. So she was basically a perpetual student from that point on. Did a bachelor's and a master's in sociology, anthropology. Did a master's or whatever it is in pastoral studies, or like to be a spiritual, accompaniment person. Then went and did a doctorate in educational studies, and her thesis, the thing that she published, was about the role of spirituality in addiction because of her personal experience, but also living and working in the downtown East Side and connecting with people and their stories. And then she became a Franciscan nun of a very unique order that I think doesn't exist now, but they were the Franciscan Sisters of Joy. So they were true Franciscans. They didn't own any property at all. So they had to look after their own needs, and they didn't live in community. They lived wherever they were, but they came together a couple times a year and lived a Franciscan charism, as they call it. But then she found the Roman Catholic women priest movement and realized she had a calling to be a priest. And she had basically all the education. She had to do a little bit of extra stuff to like get her level up or whatever. But the way the Roman Catholic women priests work is there has to be a community, like a parish that calls you to be a priest, and then you ask the bishop to ordain the priest. So yes, core members of this community, like not people who had always lived here, me and a couple of other people who were like always supporters and comrades, got together and wrote the letter to the bishop and said, we have a church, we're calling it Our Lady of Guadalupe Tonantzin, and we want Vicky to be our priest, so ordain her. And so that happened. So the church was part of our community, but also separate. Like they were coexisting things, and lots of crossover between the communities. And it was a church for people who didn't have church, or people who were excluded, who were queer or divorced and remarried, or all those things that are excluded from the Catholic Church. So the worship style was in the Catholic liturgy style, but small in the round and using inclusive language. So the language was like rewritten to be feminized or inclusive. And yeah, so we did that for how long? 10, 14 years-ish, maybe, till her health was not good and she retired. We retired the church. Yeah.
Can you paint a little bit bigger of a landscape for me of the downtown east side? And you talked a little bit about before the interview about Mary's Place and just some of the going-ons before the Catholic workers started. Like, what was that seed where you all made those relationships for this to happen?
Yeah, a lot of that was down to Vicky because of the work where she worked and what she did. Because I've worked at the library for like 30 years, but came to the community as someone who's drawn to the community and the people in the community. So Vicky worked in the Catholic churches. There's a couple of Catholic churches that are the downtown east side parishes that have been, like, usually each church has a priest and the bishop directs that priest, but some churches have priests that are from orders, so like Franciscans or Oblates, or like, so they sort of have this other relationship where they have their own community, and the church poobahs say, yeah, you can look after these churches. They're still our churches, but you can be the ones working in them. So St. Paul's on Cordova Street and Sacred Heart on Kiefer were those two churches that are connected and served by the same priests. And so there were over the years have been some very cool Oblate priests there. The Oblates are not there anymore. And they had a direct connection, like literally the building, St. Paul's on Cordova, was connected to the Sisters of the Atonement. And the sisters did food service. And at one point in the past, they had a daycare. So over the years, like, they were very well known for being very open and compassionate in the community. So that's, Cordova and Jackson. So it goes Jackson, Gore, Main Street. So everybody knows Main and Hastings. It's sort of the central. So the Catholic, on Cordova, there's the Catholic Church of St. Paul's, and it was the Sisters of the Atonement. It's different group now. And on the opposite corner is St. James, which is an Anglican church. And then 2 blocks over was First United Church, which was a church that turned into a shelter, and they're now building social housing on that site. And then there's a few other church communities that are all connected. So the Christian churches in the community had connections and communicate with each other and serve the population in a variety of ways. St. James Anglican has a street priest, so Father Matthew goes out and has relationships with people and talks to them, figure out what's going on and assists where they can, those kind of things. So that's the sort of the environment of these and some other church folks. So Vicky was doing some administrative work for the Catholic parish, and so had access to, and part of her work was working with these populations. For me, what drew me down to the neighborhood, which is how I met Vicky, was the Sisters of the Atonement and some of the service that they did. So the church that I was attending, there was a little tiny connection, and I took it and ran with it. And then encountered this very cool priest, Father Bob Douglas, who had started a Sunday night service that was like essentially for younger people, but it wasn't all young people, but it was in a very different style. It was like up on the altar and just chairs around the altar and like more relaxed and casual and a shared homily and all that kind of stuff. And I was like, "Ooh, okay, maybe the church is okay. This church is okay." And Bob was very cool because he was someone who didn't like go from high school into seminary and become a priest. Like he had a life and then decided to become a priest. So he had some context of like living in the world. And I think that makes a big difference when people have some lived experience before they jump into service. So that's sort of what drew me and then kept me connected and kept me moving in these circles that connected with those circles. So often the people that would come and stay here were referred by our various comrades in the neighborhood from the different churches and agencies that serve. Yeah.
Okay. Can you reflect a little bit more on having some of that life experience maybe before you enter a professional role in faith? Like you talked to me a little bit about how, I'm looking at art of Dorothy Day and she's smoking, and they talk about the history of her having an abortion and maybe like some of Peter's influences that injected faith into her politics. Can you touch on that a little bit more? Just what affinitizes someone to this kind of way?
Well, I don't know if I can talk about it. It makes sense to me that like I would say anything, but some things more than others. Like anything where people are going to be working and relating with people, and that's the essence of what you do. Like the relationship you have with people will govern what work you do and the things that they need and how you can help. Because I was going to say, someone who maybe like goes through school and like straight into med school and becomes a doctor, I wouldn't argue that it would be important for them to have like life experience before they become a doctor to make them a better doctor. It might, but like maybe less so for something like that. But when it's religious, social work, like stuff where it's relational and in the world, as opposed to sort of niched in a very particular service, context is everything, right? So how can like it's a piece of argument that some people make about the Catholic Church and priests, well, A, being only men, but B, also not being married. It's like, how can single men who have no experience of the world offer relevant advice to people who have 5 kids and can't pay the rent and, and their relationship is breaking down? Like, what? I mean, maybe they can. Maybe they have lots of skills, but I would say on the majority, probably not, right? So having some experience of life and the struggles of life will at least give you, hopefully, some empathy or compassion for what others are going through, so that you might have an answer, and it's a really good answer for what someone might need, but you might not deliver it in the same way just because, I know that this will work for you, as opposed to, well, here's what I've experienced and I think this will work for you, kind of thing. I don't know. That's not the best
Sounds
example.
very organic.
Totally.
It makes sense to me. And nothing is ever black and white 100%, but if it's relational, then I think some shared experience is a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned like how, the priests in the Catholic Church are like always men. And I think like traditional understandings of Catholicism are like very heavily patriarchal. But Catholicism also like seems to hold a particular place for like female figures, like the reverence for Mary and the Marys. Can you speak a little bit to the Catholic worker movement and intersections with feminist movements, and maybe how that's influenced by like the particular places that women hold in Catholic scripture as well?
I don't know. That's actually a really good question. And I
Mhm.
don't know if I can't recall if we've ever sort of explored that in the context of the worker movement.
Mhm.
Feels like that would be a conversation I would love to have with Vicky, and now we can't anymore.
Yeah. We
Um,
talked a little bit this morning about how you guys chose to name your chapter
mhm.
Our Lady of Guadalupe Thompson. Maybe that ties in a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, for us specifically, there's a feminist interest and context for faith. So yeah, so I can only speak for us. I can't really speak for other. I mean, a lot of the other communities that are still around are ones that have been around for a long time. So the people who started them, I don't even know,
Mhm.
right? Like, but we started in 1998, and so yeah, I was speaking about the experience that Vicky and I had with the Global Awareness Through Experience project and the Goddess Gate, and we went to Mexico and were exposed to like all these images and history of the feminine divine, and then did some contemplation of the intersection with Christian feminine theology. I'm not the theologist like Vicky. So our structure was like Vicky was very much the scholar, like not just for me, but for me, like I learned so much just from like hanging out and chatting with her because of all of her interests and the education that she did. But also, she was the scholar for the community, and of course, as the priest, as I said, that she was a better writer than a speaker, and she would agree with that. But she put a lot of thought and energy and preparation into her sermons to share all that knowledge that she had gleaned from things that she had studied. And so those elements of, like finding all of the places where interpretation of scripture like has maybe always been one way, but others are looking at it with a feminist lens. But even just pointing out the really obvious stuff that like the Holy Spirit is always referred to as feminine, and we talk sometimes about, like there's the magic of the number three and the Trinity and all that kind of stuff, which is like the mystery of it's God, but there's three essences or like three whatever. But sometimes we talked about really it should have been a quad and Mary was the other one. And then that would be a more balanced of the sort of masculine feminine energy. I mean, we didn't go too far down that road, but it was sort of always a thing that we just agreed on.
No Jesus without Mary.
100%. That's right.
How does the Catholic worker contend with colonialism and the residential school legacy of the Catholic Church and churches in Canada?
Well, for us, as the awareness grew and our intentional self-education grew, it became a big thing for us. I mean, like I say, there may be other Catholic worker communities in Canada. I'm not aware. There have been over time some. So in the Canadian context, I'm not aware of any others. But yeah, for us, there's several reasons why the history of colonialism and our understanding of BC being mostly untreated territory, which is different than the rest of the country, really started to become part of like our understanding and identity. One of the things that Vicky did for work before she retired from work before being a priest was she did contract consulting work with community development and stuff. And then the company that she worked for also was contracted to do some of the, how do you even call it, like the examining the documentation from the residential school. So the project of looking at the documents for the purposes of doing reparations for like through the government.
Yeah.
So she had to look at some awful, gross, evil stuff. And a lot of it was redacted, but like it was still bad, right? So that was part of her work. So she was able to speak about that, like the truth. She was exposed to the truth in a way that a lot of people are not, like the actual documentation of the schools. So and the downtown east side has, outsized proportion of Indigenous people who struggle economically and socially and health-wise. So it's part of our reality that, and this is like ground zero for the missing and murdered women and girls and two-spirited people, because this is where Robert Pickton like ran his operation. So it's very much part of everything, like all, even if there wasn't explicit discussion about, because it was all pre-Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the churches had at least some sensitivity around that history, even if there was not any kind of acknowledgement. But it was like, but the people who do the work understand and develop ways to be more empathetic and try to provide culturally sensitive services, I guess. So for us, then some of the roundtable work that we did was studying books. Like, there's a few books that we went through that were around settler identity and just like trying to dig into that. And the last one that we did, actually, we were doing just before COVID hit. And so then I figured out a way that we could do it online, was Unsettling the Word. You might have seen that book we had. So it's reflections on scripture by mostly Indigenous people and sort of unpacking it. And sometimes it's just poetry and sometimes it's prose and sometimes it's political. But we would just like once a month, we're like, okay, we're going to do this one. And so, and we would do it online. And so even if people didn't have the book or hadn't read it, we would like read through it. And then Vicky and I would talk about it. So yeah, we tried to center that a lot.
Do you receive any kind of support from established Catholic Church, or does the diocese help with finances? Is there a tension with the larger church? Do you want to speak on that?
So to be very clear, Catholic Worker is not part of any Catholic church. Never has, never will be. I think some communities do have relationships with like parishes and stuff. And so we actually did have we had a relationship with the downtown east side parishes because Vicky was working there, and and that was where we worshipped for a while anyways, but not financial. And in fact, when we started talking about doing this and the word kind of trickled up because Vicky was working at the downtown east side parishes, and Father Bob said that he would sort of be our like spiritual director or whatever, because he was totally into Catholic Worker also. And so somehow that got up the chain, and then there was a phone call to Father Bob. It was like, what's going on? What is this thing? You can't, And then like they can't call themselves Catholic Worker. I was like, actually, we can. And I said, and we'll just spell it with a K, whatever. Like pay the long distance fee, call the Diocese of New York. They'll explain to you what Catholic Worker is because it's been around a long time. So yeah, they would rather not acknowledge us. And we had some relationship though, like with people who do Catholic education through the parishes. And so there was a few years where the Catholic educators in Vancouver, they do like a little conference every year. And so for a couple of years, we were invited to have a table in their sort of exhibit area so that people could come and talk to us about it. And then they would have a mass at the end of their thing, and the collection, like one time they donated the collection to us. So yeah, so not official, but but like wherever there was like priests or church people who like understood it and appreciated it, like there was that kind of connection. But, yeah.
The last Pope Francis and the present Pope Leo seem to have like changed or shifted the political organization or orientation of the Catholic Church. Do you think that might like influence how like mainstream Catholic institutions relate to Catholic worker movement?
No, uh, not really. I mean, the Catholic Church is a behemoth.
Yeah.
I mean, I've said for years it needs to implode and like, just start over. Like, but Pope Francis and Pope Leo are definitely like hopeful. Like I never, in the dark days of Pope Benedict, I never thought we'd have a Pope Francis and a Pope Leo. Like it's a bit of this saying the quiet part out loud. Finally, somebody's saying it, but it's not. I mean, as you can see, the church in the U.S., like those bishops are not interested in, So whatever, it doesn't really matter because the anarchist piece of Catholic Worker is like we're just organizing from the ground, and it really doesn't matter what they're doing up there. And the weird thing about philosophy and religious faith is like you can stick an institution over top of it if you want to, but that doesn't really mean anything in terms of like people and their relationship to God or creator or whoever they call. So, and we don't really want official sanction. Thank you very much. So, I think it's great. I think, if nothing else, it gives permission to people who like have those thoughts and think, oh, this is not an environment where I can even explore that. Well, maybe people will explore it because people are modeling on some level, like, oh, we should think about humans differently now. What a novel idea.
Right. Reflecting on your own activities within the Catholic Worker movement here, I would like you to respond to a quote from Dorothy Day, writing in the Catholic Worker magazine in 1949. This is the quote. The word anarchist is deliberately and repeatedly used in order to awaken our readers to the necessity of combating the all-encroaching state and to shock serious students into looking into the possibility of another society. An order made up of associations, guilds, unions, communes, voluntary associations of people, on a regional instead of national lines, where this is a possibility of liberty and responsibility for everyone. How does this anarchist mandate inspire your movement?
Well, it's liberating. I mean, for me, growing up Catholic, I mean, I'm technically not Catholic anymore because as soon as we touched the Roman Catholic women priest movement, we were all excommunicated, especially for like holding church services in our house, whatever. So that idea was liberating to me. It was like, oh, I can take these ideas of love and mutuality and enact them, and I don't need anybody's permission to do it. And I don't need to be part of an official church, especially if that church doesn't like behave the way I think it should. And like the other piece of my life that I haven't mentioned, other than the fact that I work in a public library, is that from the beginning of that work, I became involved in my union at work. And that was partly because my dad was a union member and I understood, oh, well, if you're in a union, you go to meetings. And when you go to meetings, well, then you get asked to do stuff. So, so I've been very involved in that all along. And those two things align completely. I mean, you said it in the quote, right? It talks about unions. It's people organizing in the place where they are for their liberation. Yes, unions get pretty bureaucratic, but at the base level, it's somebody got treated shitty and someone else is going to come up along beside you and try to make it right and try to support, right? That's what we're doing. And that's what we're doing in the community too.
What do you say to those who say anarchism and religion or spirituality cannot coexist?
That they don't understand anarchism?
Are you willing to share a little bit more about your excommunication from the church?
Well, it's assumed because that's just like, that's what happens. So if you have, I mean, I don't know if this is still true because, and it's only because I really don't care. I don't value that. But what I learned maybe in Catholic school or somewhere else that like, they used to tell us, well, people who had abortion would be excommunicated, right? And for various things. And it's not like they didn't actually send us a paper. I kind of wished they had, but they didn't. So, because the Roman Catholic women priest movement is not, there's all this technical language that Vicky understood that I kind of don't care about, but is like not sanctioned. So back when it started, it was some priests who were behind the Iron Curtain in Eastern Europe, and there was no church. And so male bishop ordained some women so that there would be priests for the people who had religious community. And so then when the Iron Curtain came down, it was like, oh no, we don't have those women priests. So that's sort of where that started. So there is, for the technicality of the people who care about the technicality, they were legitimately ordained by a legitimate bishop. And so that's how it sort of has perpetuated, right? And so they do follow some like rules, but because women are, people who they have not said are allowed to be ordained in this church are being ordained and practicing in this way and calling themselves Catholic, well, then they're excommunicated. So in fact, when we planned the ordination for Vicky, we did send out some invitations to people, being careful because there's Catholics who appreciate and want this movement, but are still attached to their Catholic faith, and depending on their role in the world, could put them like in some risk, like say a Catholic school teacher or somebody who works in a church. So we were careful. We invited friends to come if they wanted to. But someone somewhere forwarded the invite to the bishop. We had a suspicion about who it was. I can't recall now. Anyways, so Vicky got called in because she had a connection to the church as the Franciscan Sisters of Joy were like she was allowed to be a nun here. Like everything has to go through the bureaucracy like to be official. So she had a connection to all of the other nuns in Vancouver, and like they were acknowledged. Franciscan Sisters of Joy were acknowledged, so they knew who she was. And so the bishop called her in for a meeting, and there was one other priest, Roman Catholic woman priest here in BC. She lived over on Main Island. She was sort of Vicky's mentor. So she came over, and the three of us went to the office together because I was like, she's not going by herself. We're going with her. She's got a posse. And so we like march in there, and we marched right into his office with her. And he's like, "Oh, I want to talk to Vicky alone." And we're like, "Okay." So we just stood outside, and I was at the time when Twitter wasn't evil, I was like live tweeting. "Oh, we're at the Chancery office." And so anyways, so he at least knew she had some backup. And basically he was very nice to her. He wasn't nasty to her, but said, that this is not cool, and I would ask that you not do this. And she's like, okay, I hear you. And we went on and did it anyways. Yeah. So I kind of anticipated that like she would at least get some like letter or something, but I don't think she did. None of us did, but like it's understood that those of us who organized the ordination and that for sure would be like out. But I was the only one who was sort of going to a Catholic church at that point anyways. So I was like, don't really care.
How does the concept of evangelization tie into your conception of anarchism? What does it mean to evangelize? Is it more about faith? Is it about anarchy? Is that the same thing to you? How does your relationship to God motivate your political action?
Well, I have a physical reaction to the word evangelize.
Okay.
And it's been a topic of discussion many times in this house.
I see.
But I know what you mean. Yeah, I guess it's not about either. It's about how we should be in the world and how we should treat each other, essentially. And it'll look different for everyone in their context of, but if it's rooted in the two great commandments, love God and love everybody else.
Could you say that 10 more times over?
Yeah. And not like one over the other, just like together at the same time. That's what matters. And so it's more about what you do than like what you talk about. And that's a kind of a St. Francis saying that I love, is preach always and sometimes use words. Like that's the abbreviated version of it,
Mhm.
right? Is
Preach,
yeah,
preach always, and sometimes use words.
yeah,
That's cool.
Preach
Right?
through action.
yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Like yeah, people will see what you're doing and they will ask. I mean, and if there's an opportunity, maybe you will tell, but like let people ask, let people
Mm.
figure out like why do you do that?
By creating a space for religious and spiritual anarchists, how do you or would you respond to like the concerns of women, queer folks, and others who have been victimized in the name of religion?
Well, I mean, at the heart of it, that is the blame lies on institutional like practice of faith. You know, get two humans together and some shit's gonna go down.
Mhm.
Get a couple billion and it's like, oh look, we have a system and it must be a cookie cutter. So for sure, like I mean, that's definitely part of why Vicky became a priest and why we created this like tangential community of like church community alongside Catholic Worker was because she understood personally for herself and for people she loved that that exclusionary piece and the lack of evangelizing about love, full stop, one word, that's it. And to take some of those oppressive structures away so that like those are not barriers to people loving or people being loved.
Mhm. Mm.
Can you touch more on the idea of spiritual sanctuary, or why a house? Why a Christ room? Why this idea
Oh.
of hosting?
Well, I guess because I mean, I tend more on the introvert side, and
Mhm.
so I also wasn't sure about like moving into a communal house when
Mhm.
I've been happily ensconced in my basement suite by myself, and I'm liking it. And I think Vicky was similar, but clearly humans are made to be social, and so we can be social and supportive, or we can be social and oppressive. So that's, like we need support. And so back to the idea of a family home, like the idea of family like may be triggering to people because their experience of family was not.
Mhm.
But the concept of family of a group of people who, when you're vulnerable, i.e. a child or an elder, like need some literal physical support, but in any case have understood empathetic relationship that, you know, gives what you give what you can when you can and receive what you need also without like having to recreate new relationships all the time. Like build those relationships and then create a space where people can easily come into relationship
Mhm.
when they need it and ask for what they need.
Yeah, that makes me think. I mean, there's a shared history across many faith groups of like the concept of sanctuary and like thinking about the current political context in the United States and this history of the sanctuary movement and immigration in like the 80s in particular. Like, what kind of roles do you see Catholic workers taking on? I mean, I guess particularly in the States, since there's like lots of chapters in the States, like what kind of roles do you see folks potentially taking on in terms of addressing what's going on right now with, the rise of fascism and lots of violence towards immigrant communities?
Mm. Well, there's certainly a history of Catholic workers like where it was I think where like an actual sanctuary movement was happening with a church like being involved in that. And I mean we see from some of the news that we're hearing like people are providing sanctuary to their neighbors anyways, right?
Mhm.
They're letting them stay with them because they're afraid to go out or they're bringing them food, and groceries and stuff because they're not leaving their homes. And I mean, that's in essence what hospitality is. I mean, it's like with a political twist. It's not just like I'm having a shitty time and I need some help, but like, oh my God, there's like serious oppression going on and we need to make sure that we're providing for people. So like it's a complete natural fit, but it will depend on what the community is like and what they have to offer. I mean, we personally had experience with that with the US soldiers resisting the war on Iraq. So they were coming to Canada, there was this movement, the war resistor movement, and we became involved in it early on. Like we became the Vancouver hub of what had started in Toronto. And so sometimes it was literal sanctuary. There was a few people who were here who were like had not passed through the borders legally. But also we sort of focused our hospitality at that time. Like we only have a couple rooms anyways. And so it was sort of like, for a couple of years, we only had war resistors staying with us. And sometimes it was for a couple of nights and sometimes it was for a couple of weeks and sometimes it was for a year. We had a family here. Like there was a birth here, not literally in the house, but there was a family who came with a toddler and then while they were here had another child. That was wild, I have to say. And interestingly, like politically, they were not all aligned with, but there was still this essential, like, we don't agree with what's going on and I do not want to be killed for it.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. And then we facilitated the last war resistor that we worked with, we facilitated him living literally in sanctuary at First United Church before the church was torn down, and it was not operating as a church anymore. But the minister who was in charge of the shelter was a comrade, and someone got to the point in their immigration like processing where it was like, oh shit, this is like, this is the moment of truth, and so we held a press conference, and he said, Rodney's not here. He's in sanctuary at the church and he's going to stay there. He ended up living there for like 7 years. It was brutal. People kind of forgot about him, but he was safe. It wasn't violated. They were watching, but so yeah, it's a natural role, but again, because it's relational and it's radical meaning from the roots, it's like whatever skills people have and relationships they have. So it's important to make those relationships in the community, to make the community broader. So that, like, if those needs are the needs, then there's a way to meet them.
When you say they were watching, can you say who they is?
Oh, the cops and CBSA. Okay. Yeah, there was times where people knew that they were. I think they came in a couple of times asking, but they were also outside in the back alley.
After peak COVID pandemic and the rise of Christian nationalism in rural Canada and the US, do you find the tenor of Christianity kind of changing on like the secular coast? Is that something that you're noticing much?
I'm not really plugged into the church, but I mean, no, for mainline churches that like they're still doing their thing, it doesn't really crop up there. That's, I would say, just in urban Vancouver, that's not my experience. I mean, certainly we see it online and there's people who think that way, but like I'm not aware of any, but that's only because I don't, that is not my milieu. I don't like interact there. So I'm sure there always were. Well, I mean, here we have like what we call the Bible Belt, like the Fraser Valley, right? But even then, like even during COVID, like there was a couple of churches who were being resistant to like, the public health measures, but they were like seriously in the minority. Like even though the quote unquote Bible Belt is known to be like conservative in their religious outlook, it was not Christian nationalists. Like, and I'm not saying none of them are, but that's like, I've never sort of heard that that's like being an issue for people and they're starting to hear it or worry about it going that way. Yeah, not my experience.
I want to dial it back to earlier. I know that there are conversations right now within the official Catholic Church about canonizing Dorothy Day. and it seems like this is maybe a debate within the movement.
Mhm.
What are your opinions on sainthood for Dorothy Day? Do you care about an official stamp?
I
It seems like maybe not.
I don't. Yeah, no, it was interesting when that started to come up. There was the people who were, and I mean, then there's the famous Dorothy quote, which is, "Don't make me, don't make me a saint because I don't want to be dismissed." Basically, right? Like, because
Okay.
that's what happens. It's like, oh, look, it's Saint blah blah blah. There's their picture,
Yeah.
and that's all we know and care about them, as opposed to what they did and like about what they were trying to get us to do, right? The behavior that they were trying to model. So, yeah, don't really care. I mean, I don't hate the church has saints. Like, I think like we need models and things to aspire to, and you never know like what's going to speak to a person at any given time. So, like, that's fine. It's great. I wouldn't like oppose it, but I'm also not putting any energy into it. Like, there's been a few things that got sent around on the email lists about like, sign this thing or help with this, blah blah, blah, and I delete whatever.
How do you kind of view her as a saint in your eyes already? Like, how do you venerate her? Maybe just by running the house, or
Yeah, I think I think I kind of got over that. I mean, when like the first blush of when you like discover a thing, you're like, oh, this is like it's so inspiring. It's like, and it's great. It was great, but then the more you like read about her and her life, it was like, oh yeah, well, like I think sometimes she was an asshole too, and living in community is not always easy. And and the idea of hierarchy also, that's like can be a bit of a tension. It was like, how do you have a community where you're trying to sustain for the long period, like a household, without someone in charge? I think anyone who's ever tried to do like a communal thing was so. It ends up that some people are in charge.
Yeah.
Like, in the dynamic of me and Vicky was mom, I'm dad, right? Like, and I'm the one who makes sure most things get done, right? And that's just, but some of that is like my personality and what I've taken on for myself and trying to be aware of the, like, this is not necessarily hierarchical, but somebody like buck stops somewhere. I don't know. It wasn't quite like that with Dorothy because she was more like the spiritual leader and the writer. And I think she was, and she was writing and traveling and connecting with communities. And I'm sure there was some resentment about like, oh yeah, we got to keep supporting all this while, she's off gallivanting and we're doing the hard work and fundraising and whatever, I'm sure. So, like deeply appreciate the convergence of events that brought her and Peter together and like manifested this thing and her, her output as a writer and her ability to synthesize these thoughts, like they're great. They're invaluable, like 100%. Do I care that she would be a saint? No, but like obviously she's an important. I know enough about her and would continue to be curious to read things about her to be like, yeah, extremely influential person in my life, 100%. And maybe for someone who never encountered Catholic worker, that the day that she becomes a saint, and somebody who's like, oh, Saint Dorothy Day, who is that? And starts to learn about it, like they will think about her as Saint Dorothy. I probably won't, but it doesn't really matter. Yeah.
What sort of criteria do you use to decide what to take on as like an action? I mean, we've spoken kind of about like working with what you have and like where you're from. What do you see as like building community power to change conditions in following like Dorothy and Peter's vision?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it definitely shifted over time. Like started with, like I said, Vicky's, and then my connections to the community and the community that served the downtown east side. But also, I've always been interested in like, political movements and like anti-war. I mean, Catholic worker is pacifist, so I sort of contended with that concept over my life. And so when things happen, then it's like, oh, okay, where do we sit in relation to that? And so 2003, I spent time at the peace camp, and I was part of organizing the Stop War in Vancouver, and we participated in some demos. But then we also but then there was also Vicky was not so much the out on the streets person anymore because of her personality and state in life. But we had several sessions of let's do some crafting and create some prayer beads, and then when we're out in the rally, we'll so I had signs that were like prayer beads for peace. Ask me, they're free. And I would have a bag of rosaries and other types of prayer beads, and people asked for them because that's how they. So it was sort of as each thing comes along, it's like, oh, what's our role in that, or how do I fit in that, or how do I feel about that? So the War Resistor thing was someone actually emailed us because we were Catholic worker and we were in Canada saying, I think we might need an underground railroad again because, from Vietnam, because Canada has this history from Vietnam. And so that led to, I can't remember, somebody else picked it up. Some independent journalist on the island, in fact, had a listserv and picked that up. And then the connection was made with Catholic worker. And then somebody who was making a film about Vietnam vets who was from here connected with us. And then they connected us with the people who were supporting the war resistors who had just arrived in Toronto. If you create the conditions and the connections and the relationships, stuff will play out, right? So, yeah, I don't know if that answers the question, but it's sort of, it very much depends on who's involved, how much they have a passion for, and it's like anything when you're working on an issue. And you want the world to know and to understand and be outraged and change it. You often don't connect with people unless there's some personal piece, some little thing. And we find the same thing in the union, right? We have, in my local, we have 3,600 members, and most of them, a lot of them probably don't even realize they're part of the union. They don't check their pay stub and see that the dues are deducted, right?
Yeah.
And they maybe don't support us if we're not doing anything explicitly for them. But when they get in trouble at work and someone comes and represents them, and particularly if they get into a lot of trouble at work and someone represents them, they often become some of our best activists because they've touched it, they see it, they understand it, and now they value it and will perpetuate it, right? And same thing with convincing anybody of you should care about this thing. And well, sure, but until there's some little personal connection that's oh, okay, now I feel I'm tied to it a little bit, and then that will make them act. That's been my experience always. I mean, because I frequently get overwhelmed by I care about all the things.
Yeah.
And I cannot do anything about most of the things.
Yeah.
Do you work with non-Catholic anarchists? Are there other Protestants or Buddhists or atheists? Is there a lot of interlay, or is it?
I am unaware of. Yeah, it's that's not the primary connection. Yeah.
Did you start as a Catholic first? Or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I didn't not know about anarchism, but I wasn't really interested or educated in it until it came through the reading and the stuff that came with Catholic worker, and then I was oh, okay, that makes sense to me. I the big A anarchism I knew, and then and so that it didn't sort of make a lot of sense, but the way that Dorothy and Peter talk about it makes sense.
Do you think it's important for anarchists and anarchism to have connection and communication with spirituality? What can that add to anarchism? Because I know I think there's generally within anarchism a lot of atheism or agnosticism, and that can be quite hard line and actually kind of standoffish or even volatile towards even any mentions of spirituality. I know, like, in my work, in my anarchism, and I'm not like any denomination necessarily of like spirituality, although I did like grow up Catholic, but just in terms of like doing the work, especially doing the work on stolen lands as a settler, like there is a really big spiritual element for me, and that, has really like kept me on track and like helped with burnout and helped with just like deciding like what are those things that I want to put my energy into, and like how do I use my gifts to the best of my ability to do that work.
I guess because I came to it through faith, which I got from my mom. Like, it wasn't a choice; it was like an immersion, kind of thing. And then, I just picked and choose what made sense to me. I guess I don't understand the philosophy without the element of love, compassion, and care. Like, I don't understand what would motivate you to care, to try to work collectively and support each other without the need to love. And so that, for me, that is manifested through a faith practice, ultimately just a relationship with what I call God currently, but like that essence that created this world and that we live in. So I'd be curious to know what motivates someone who doesn't have it. So yeah, I mean, to what you were talking about, like where's the root, where's the core, what sustains like you on a very basic level. I don't know, like, if I didn't have like some understanding of like there's something outside of me and some greater thing, don't know what it is, don't know how it works, then what is there? Like that's it. That seems like empty to me. I don't understand the world without that. So kind of hard to. I'd be curious to hear what someone would say. Like, what motivates that? Where does that come from, and what sustains it for them? If there's nothing like there's a faith in something, obviously, right? But maybe it's not named or understood. I don't know.
I find for me something that really, keeps me going and makes me feel connected to other people in the anarchist movement is music. And more of, I guess, a fun question is, are there any particular hymns or songs from the Catholic Worker or the wider radical Christian canon that you draw inspiration from or that you really like?
Well, I mean, Catholic music is notoriously bad.
You have that anecdote about the person who was a
Yeah. So
closet.
Vicky's grandmother, who raised her. So her grandmother they were African American, and she was Baptist, and her second husband was a Muslim from Indonesia. So Grandma Rose was a closet Catholic, Vicky said. So she prayed the rosary, and she had this statue of Mary that's here in our room. But she couldn't become a Catholic because the music was bad compared to the Baptist. I like and appreciate music, but yeah, no, there's not. I mean, I'm more the play me a David Rovick's "Who Would Jesus Bomb" or I'm a better anarchist than you, like, that kind of thing. So yeah, no. And I don't know that the movement is not known to be particularly musical. There's
Okay.
definitely some arts movement in the like Midwest. They will sometimes do like a regional gathering and do like an arts and craftsy kind of weekend kind of stuff, like very like back to the land, basic arts and crafts kind of stuff. But yeah, not known for being particularly
Interesting.
musical.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe that's more of an IWW
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah. Like not, yeah, for sure. There's, I mean, I would say that music is religious, but it's not like from this movement.
Is there anything that you really want people to know about the Vancouver Catholic Worker that maybe there's something unknown, or there's a myth or something you want to clarify
Oh.
or have known?
I don't know. I mean, I am in this time of don't know what's going to happen next. Vicky and I did this together for 26, 7 years and really plan what would come next. That, the house is communal, but ultimately it's mine. And so I have mixed feelings about like what will happen next for my next phase of life.
Mhm.
Do I want to keep building the community and invite some people in? But then will I feel trapped because I want to I'm done now. I want to go. But ultimately the community is not the house. The community is the philosophy. And
Mhm.
if I were to leave and move away, there would still be a Vancouver Catholic worker if there was people who want to operate in that philosophy in whatever way works for them and whatever location works for them. So yeah, we don't have a copyright on Vancouver Catholic Worker or Samaritan House. And by the way, the name Samaritan House we were trying to figure out all the houses tend to have a name and we didn't want to call it after a saint. And so it was like, oh, well, okay, there's two stories about Samaritans that we thought intersected, which was the Samaritan woman at the well and the Good Samaritan. So that's how we landed on Samaritan.
Can you tell us more what those are?
Oh, okay. Well, the story of the Good Samaritan is this guy was walking and he got beat up by robbers, and various at the time Jewish church leaders and they had different names like Levites and whatever the names are. Anyways, they walked by and noticed and then kept on walking and didn't do anything about it. And then a Samaritan, who were the enemies of the Jews for I can't remember the reasons because I'm not a scripture scholar, but they didn't like each other and they didn't care about each other. But the Samaritan came by and saw that this guy who was a Jew was all beat up and left on the side of the road. And he took him to a place where he would be looked after and fed and clothed and wounds, taken care of. That's the behavior that was a parable of Jesus talking about. This is how we should treat each other. Doesn't matter that you're quote unquote an enemy. It's a human and we look after humans. And then the Samaritan woman at the well, again, Jesus stopped for water at a well. In his time as a single Jewish man, he shouldn't have been talking to a woman by himself. Never mind a Samaritan woman. Never mind the fact that she had been married multiple times. So she was extra bad. But he was talking to her and she was genuinely curious about him and what he had to say. And he, in the story, he knows about her life already and says, well, you've had this many husbands and whatever. The conversation goes anyways, he teaches her something that she appreciates. And she goes back and tells everybody about this guy, Jesus. And meanwhile, his followers catch up with him. They're like, oh my God, why are you talking to this woman at the well? This is terrible. She's a Samaritan. So anyways, there's the feminist piece and then there's the caring for humans piece. We put the two Samaritan stories together in a Samaritan House. So anyways, so yeah, whoever wants to be Catholic worker, there can be more than one house. It does. There wasn't one. We started one. This is what we called it. I would hope that other people would learn the philosophy, appreciate it. I mean, it makes sense for Catholics to it's an easier entrance to oh, these are people who practice the same as we do, and so comes from that same philosophy. But then blows it out the sides of the church doors and goes farther. That makes sense. But it's also just a basic philosophy of love and compassion and respect.
You told me earlier an anecdote about one of the houses in Washington, I think, that is mostly comprised of Buddhists. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean, I believe that when that community started, and I don't know if they still exist or not because they're not really connected, but I think it was a family who started it, and then their kids got older and they got older and other people sort of came and sort of took over the community. And at the point where we met them, none of them were Catholics and most of them were Buddhists. Like,
Interesting.
it doesn't, so that's the point. It doesn't really matter what your practice is, or, like what your personal faith practice is, or even with what your community faith practice is. It's the corporal and spiritual works of mercy. It's loving creation and loving each other and doing the best to look out for each other in like whatever capacity you have to do that collectively.
So if someone wanted to start Catholic Worker Chapter, say in Victoria, what advice would you give, or what would you recommend?
Some of the same advice that we got, we did. So Vicky and I and another friend who was somebody who had a car did a weekend road trip to Washington State, kind of like a trip to Vancouver. And we visited 3 different communities because those were the ones that we knew about at the time, because I'm a visual learner and I needed to understand. And we just wanted to talk to them about their experience. And all 3 were very different, different in like how long they'd been around and like their structure and who supported them. And so that was educational. It was like, oh, there's not one way, and it doesn't need to be like this. It's not like read the Loaves and Fishes and then reproduce this thing that the way they did it in New York in the 30s.
Right.
And then also at one of the houses, there was a young person who was visiting from New York, who was part of a like legacy Catholic worker family. Like their family had like grown in a Catholic worker community, and now they were a young adult and they were participating in Catholic worker communities around, because people often will travel from community to community and spend time in different ones. And their advice for us, because we were like, we're thinking about doing this, I don't know. And they're like, you could just start with a Christ room in your home, like whoever you are, wherever you live, if you have a spare room, like, because he was talking about, I think, how his parents had maybe moved out of the community as they were older and other people were sort of taking over the community, but they still always had a spare room and it was always available for someone to stay. And like, and that's the essence of it, is like the openness and the willingness to share your space, but also your life on whatever level. I mean, that's the thing when I was talking about this at work when we started it, and people were like, "You're gonna have strangers stay in your house?" I was like, "Yeah, that's the point." Right? But I mean, that's a real concept. But if you think about it, like people will take in extended family members or friends of family sometimes, often stories that you hear are like a family and their kid knows another kid who's like got a shitty situation or, whatever. And it's like, oh yeah, well, we've got spare room, you come live with us. Like that's essentially it. But they don't have to have that kind of connection. I mean, you do whatever is comfortable and you don't put yourself in like harm's way and at risk, but you also do take some risk about being open and willing to like offer some support if you can. I mean, ultimately it's on your own terms. And yes, we have had to ask people to leave for various reasons, but yeah, so like just that you just need to have an openness, and you can do it in a small group and then see what happens. I mean, there was small decisions made along the way when we were struggling with, how do we do this and where do we do this and what do we do it with? And as we started to be like, well, okay, well, I think I told you at one point, I said to Vicky, well, let's just get a place together because we now are living not so far apart, like, and we spend all our time together. We're both paying rent. Like, why don't we just get a place together, like for now, because we're doing all this stuff together anyways. We never ended up doing that. We ended up in the house, but I felt like that kind of opened the floodgates of like, some other stuff started to happen because that particular obstacle had been like blown up in my mind, right? It was like, well, let's just share space. Oh, okay, now we can share space with a whole bunch of people because it all started to flow from there.
Start small, start with what you have.
Yeah.
How can people in so-called Vancouver get involved? Where would they go?
Oh, so we do have a Facebook page and a website, so vancouvercatholicworker.org. It's not very active. This is, this last year's been a fallow kind of year for me with Vicky dying and my dad dying and not knowing what's going to happen, but I'd love the site up. So, and we have an email address there. And yeah, thought about it. I was like, oh, maybe I should take all that down because I don't know if I want any, I don't know if I want to keep doing this, and I don't, maybe it shouldn't like be false advertising, but, but it's really about the idea. And so if it's enough for people to read and think and dream, and
No, we found it.
yeah, in order to do their own thing, then that's fine. Like I got over it pretty quick in my head.
Are you still collecting donations to run the house?
There are a few donations that trickle in, and we're not really doing a hospitality now in the same way, and so there's not as much need. But like if I was to sort of ramp up the community again and be wanting to offer hospitality, because we do it without charge to people. And our philosophy was always, because people were like, well, how long can people stay? It's like, well, it's however long they need. And for me, over the years, I've distilled it down to various forms of, as long as people are doing something for themselves that's improving their lives. And so for some people, it's they just needed to rest or they just needed to heal. But then it's, maybe they want to go back to school or, so whatever it is, as long as they're moving forward in some way to like improve their lives the way they want to see it, then I'm fine. It's if you get stuck, then, well, somebody else might want that space. So, so then people do sometimes get to a point where like they got a job and they're going to they'll contribute it, voluntarily if they want to. So at this point, we're not soliciting donations, but in future, if we're sort of offering more active hospitality or doing any kind of like activity in the community, we'll advertise. I mean, we had to do it we renovated this house. It was really old and run down, and eventually made that. So there was a big fundraising pitch. It was very uncomfortable. I still have a giant mortgage from it, but still, like we fundraised and people were generous, and it was great because, but it's all about connections. It's not about like, hey, you should give us money. It's like, come and hang with us and like help us if you can. Yeah.
Just before we close, I'm just wondering if there's any like little funny stories or anecdotes from your time in the house that would just be nice to share. The kookiest thing that's ever happened.
There's been some interesting things, but a more fun story is that, so it's like the house you're seeing now is all like sort of nice, proper walls and floors and all that kind of stuff. But
it's very nice.
But prior to that, it was old and kind of grungy, and the basement was unfinished, so there was no walls. It was just like exposed everything, and we created rooms out of fabric with like staple guns. And there was someone who lived here for a few years who like loved all creatures, and so we've had many pets over the years. And in particular, he had like an iguana and a chameleon, and then there was a bearded dragon, and there was a hedgehog. So the chameleon ate crickets. I think it was the bearded dragon ate crickets. So sometimes the crickets would get loose. Right. And so, and there would be like, hey, there's some crickets somewhere in the house. But it also inspired others. So there was a young man, I can't even remember his name, but he was a lovely young guy who lived with us for a couple of months. And he got inspired to also get a lizard pet. I think it was a skink. But it disappeared one day.
Oh. And
I think maybe a year later we found but it was somewhere like in the rafters. Yeah. So yeah. So there were times where when people asked me to describe the house, I would say that there were more animals than humans in the house. Because Dr. Doolittle lived here.
Well, we met Beauty the dog and Sheba the cat, and they're both wonderful.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, if you want to know more about the Vancouver Catholic Worker, we will have the link attached in the podcast wherever you're listening to it from. Sarah, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Yeah.
If Jesus Christ came back today like you threaten he will, which poor group of people do you think that he would kill? And who would Jesus choose to starve if you gave him the chance? And if there was a genocide, would he take a neutral stance? Who would Jesus bomb? Tell me, who would Jesus bomb? Would it be kids in Palestine, or how about Vietnam? Would Jesus bomb the atheists, the Muslims, or the Jews? I want you to ask yourself, well, what would Jesus do? I want you to ask yourself, well, what would Jesus do? Would he say it's complicated and there's sinners on both sides? Or would he say that some people, they just deserve to die? If Jesus Christ rose from the dead and on a sidewalk slept, would you extend your hand to him or just watch where you stepped? Who would Jesus bomb? Tell me, who would Jesus bomb? Would it be kids in Palestine, or how about Vietnam? Would Jesus bomb the atheists, the Muslims, or the Jews? I want you to ask yourself, well, what would Jesus do? I want you to ask yourself, well, what would Jesus do? Would Jesus hate the gay folk, the queer folk, or the trans? Would he suggest they end their lives according to God's plans? Would Jesus tell a homeless man to get a fucking job, or turn his back on the poor? Would Jesus be a snob? Who would Jesus bomb? Tell me, who would Jesus bomb? Would it be kids in Palestine, or how about Vietnam? Would Jesus bomb the atheists, the Muslims, or the Jews? I want you to ask yourself, well, what would Jesus do? I want you to ask yourself, well, what would Jesus do? Would Jesus build a border wall? Would Jesus drive a tank? Would Jesus be a landlord? Would Jesus run a bank? Would Jesus Christ feel safe in his skin if he came to your town? And would you still believe in him if you found out he was brown? Who would Jesus bomb? Tell me, who would